welcome everybody. Good evening. This is Abhilash from GDSC Web Dev Lead, and welcome to the Jetpack Compose a hands-on session on Kotlin and Jetpack. And today it's an hands-on session where you guys will be coding along with our facilitator, who is Manjunath RK, and the speaker of the day. And hope you guys have the GitHub repo access that we had put in the story this morning and kept your Android Studio open. And also, I encourage you guys not to hesitate to ask any doubts. You can ask in the between, like while the speaker is coding, you can ask any of your doubts. So feel free to ask your doubts and put up the questions. And yep, over to you, Manju.
Yeah, thank you, Abhilash. I think my screen is visible and I'm audible, right?
Yep, Manjunath.
Yeah, cool. So, hello everyone. I'm Manjunath, Flutter lead at GDSC JSSSTU. So, to recap, in the previous sessions, we learned how to compose or build UIs, right, using Jetpack Compose. But just creating a static UI serves you nothing, right? Since in the real world, the apps you will be using or you will be building will have some sort of interactivity, right? The interactions could be something like, the user clicks on some button, then something happens on the screen, or he might type some text on the text box. And using this data, we need to process something and so on. To summarize, what I'm trying to say is all the apps that you use in daily life will have some sort of interactivity, right? So speaking of interactivity, so as Abhilash said earlier, even if you have serious doubts, you can put them in the chat box and I will be happy to clear them. So today we will be focusing more on adding interactivity to the app rather than just building the UI, right? So today we will be building this minimal yet functional app tip calculator. So before we get started, so if you click on this, just a minute. Yeah. So if you click on this starter code, you will be able to access the starter code and you should clone it and open it in the Android Studio. So as I said, this will basically has the UI that looks like this. And here it is the text box where we will type the total amount. And here it is the state option where we will increase the head count. And finally, here we have a slider where we will specify the tip percentage, right? So before we move on to the code part, first let me discuss like what is this declarative UI model. So if you remember in the previous sessions, we came across these two terms, declarative UI model and imperative model, right? So in simple terms, as I said in previous sessions, declarative UI model means you just declare what you want and it will be visible on the screen, right? As simple as that. But this is for the creating static UI, right? So what if you have what if you want to add interactivity? So for that, you need to understand how declarative UI model handles data or interactivity. So basically, data is nothing but the information that will be passed to and fro between various composables or widgets. So in declarative UI model, we will be passing data down the line. So if you see in our uh, tip calculator, we have entered the data here, right? So even though the visual hierarchy, you might think that we are passing the data up, right, to the composable that is present above this text box, right? But in code, we will be having something like here you will be having this text field, but you will be passing this data, or you can think of it like returning some values from the function. So you will be passing the data up to the main composable, right? So data is passed down from the main function. In other words, we pass the data into a main composable and other inner composable. So what is this main composable? So in C, you have something like main functions, right? So in main function, you will be calling various functions. While calling functions, you will be also passing data, right? So it is quite similar to that. So we will be passing data to the main composable and composables that is present inside the main composable will react to the data. So as seen, it will describe some UI on the screen. So that is how you pass data in declarative UI model. So what is this event? We have one more term called as events. What is this event? So you can think of events like some interactions. It could be something like clicking on the button or some gesture on the screen and so on. So basically events will be sent up the hierarchy, right? So in other words, here we have some screen. So let me take the example of tip calculator itself. So here we have the screen. So if I press this split like the add button that is present beside the split option, it will basically increase the count, right? So this count along with the total bill will be passed and processed behind the scenes, and then it will be passed to this composable that is present above the text box. So that is how you pass events. So as the slide says, an event is triggered or it is triggered when an user tries to interact with the app. Then we will be passing this interaction up the hierarchy, and then based on logic, the UI components are rendered, right? So in Compose, we call rendering as recompose. So what is this new term, recompose? So as the if you take the literal meaning, compose means showing some UI on the screen, right? Recompose means building the same UI component again, so as to reflect the changes that has occurred due to some changes in the data, right? So if you come to this, I will type some like amount, so it will be reflected on the screen, right? If you try to increase the split, then also it will reflect on the screen, right? So basically it's like recomposing, right? So let me go through this recomposition again. So what is this recomposition? The process of calling your composable function again when your input or data changes. So as I said earlier, if you take the example of this tip calculator, if you try to now it is 2, right? If you try to increase it by 1, if you press this button, it will increase to 3, right? So basically it is recomposing this part on the screen. So that is what recomposition in simple terms. So next we have something. So okay, before we move on to this data, so in programming, we don't just call it as data. Like we need to manage data and all, right? But in fancy terms, we call it as state. So state is nothing but any value that can change over time. So here in our present context, it is basically the tip percentage. So it is basically the bill amount and the split value and the tip percentage. It can change over any time, right? Based on user preference, right? So that is what is state. So you can summarize it as based on the state, the UI changes. So you could say like UI is basically the function of state. Okay. Before we like now, speaking of state, now all of you I think are in the waiting state, right? So I think it's time to get our hands dirty with some code. Yeah. Close these slides. Okay, this is the starter project, starter code that will be available to you after you clone it from the GitHub, and you should be able to open the project by using this open option, right? For now, I'll just close up this emulator. Yeah, so if you see this project structure, just a minute. Yeah, if you see this project structure, we have this folder called as app, and within the app folder, we have various folders, but we will just focus on this Java folder, right? So in Java, we have something like 3 folders, but we will just open this first folder that says com.example.tipcalculator. So here you will be having again we have some new folders. So first we have something like components. So in this file, we will be coding all the components that we will be using in our app. So example, we have this input field. We need to implement it, but we will be coding all the components that we will be including in our app. So this is regarding components. And here it contains all the information regarding the theming. Next up, we have something called as Util. So basically, here we will be having the logic to calculate the total tip and the total amount per person. So we need to implement this as well. And finally, we have something called as widgets. So where we will be coding some buttons. So if you see this, we have some round buttons, right? So we will be coding this, putting the code for these round buttons within this widgets file. So this was regarding the various types of files that is present within the startup project. So next we have something called as main activity, right? So in main activity, if you remember, we have this class called as main activity. Don't get intimidated by these terms. So basically, if you see this set content, so it will be used to set the content on the screen. So it's basically taking. So if you remember, it's like it is a trailing lambda, right? So basically, you're passing functions as a parameter to another function. So set content is a function. So if you see here, my app is also a function, right? So I am passing this my app function within this set content function. So if you look at this code my app, it has a parameter called as content, which is of the type composable, and it returns nothing. So if it returns nothing, we will be specifying it with the keyword called as unit, right? So it has some code. Let us go through this. So first we have something called as a tip calculator code, a tip calculator theme. So this is where all the basic or default theming will be present. And next, as I said in the previous session, in order to draw something on the screen, we need to have a surface, right? So even Compose provides something called as surface. So I will be calling this function called as surface, and I will be setting the color of the surface to background. So if you go through this, it will be present. So the this color is specified in this theme folder. So basically, it will be white by default. So even our app has the same color. If you look at our app, even it has the same background. So we will just go with the basics of the default theme. So next, within the surface, we will be calling the composable that has been passed to this my app function. So in our case, the name of the composable is called as main content. And if you want to see this code main content, yeah, here we have something called as the main content. So in this, so before we go through this, so remember, uh, we used to declare variables like this, right? So basically what happens is if you restart the whole app, all the data that is stored in this variable will be reset to its default value. Say I have some value like a is equal to 1. And if you try to show this on the app, at first it will be presented as 1. Then say due to some user interaction, the value of the a changes to 2. Then also the app displays the correct value. But once you close the app and restart the app reverts back to this old value. In our case, it is 1. So we need to remember the changes, right? So to remember the changes that is happening within the variable, we have some syntax like say I want to remember the value of a, I'll declare the variable as a. And since I want to remember, I will specify some keyword like remember, and I will open the curly braces. Since if you remember, we used to declare list like this, right? If we want to modify the list, we had something like mutable list of, right? So in the similar way, since this value changes, since this value changes, we should specify something like mutable state of, and within this we should specify its initial value. So it could be something like 1. So this is how you remember the value of the variables that is being used in the app, right? So we'll remove this. Yeah. So if you look at the app, I'll just close this. Yeah. Yeah, we have something like split by state. So basically, yeah, so if you can see this, just a minute, it's lagging. Yeah. So if you see this screen, like we have something like split, right? To store the value of the split, we will be using this variable called as split by state, and we will initialize with it with some value called as 3. Then we have range. So we will be using this range, like we can't, yeah. So we can't, you can't let the user to tap this add button for many times. We should have some limits, right? So in order to constrain those limits, we will be using this variable called as range. Next up, we have something called as tip amount state. So that is basically corresponding to this variable. Next, we have something called as total person per state. Yeah, so tip amount state is basically the this is the bill amount, and total per person state will be represented here in the UI. This $56 is corresponding to this total per person state. Okay, next we have something called as bill form. So before we moving on to this composable function, first we should understand this. So here in our code, I have named this purple colored composable as top header. So if you go through this code, so basically I'm declaring this top header. It takes a parameter of the type total per person. So since, and it will be of the type double. So here I'm specifying the default value, and then since I want to draw something on the screen, I will be using this surface composable. And within this surface composable, as I said earlier in the previous session, every composable comes with some default styling, right? But what if we want to modify? So for that, we need to use something called as modifier. So I will be using this modifier, and it takes an object called as modifier. And on this object, we can call several functions. So first, I will try to add the padding. What is this padding? This is padding corresponds to this white space around this purple container. So what is next? We have something like fill max width. So what it does is it basically occupies the maximum width, maximum possible width available to this composable. So if you can see, after adding the padding, it has occupied the maximum width, right? So this is the height of the container. I specified it as 150 units. And since I want to have some nice rounded corners, I have specified something like clip. So what it does is basically it takes, earlier it was a rectangular shape. It takes that rectangular shaped surface and adds rounded corners with the corner size of 12, right? So this is the background color. So this is a hex code which corresponds to this purple color, right? So next we need to have content within this surface, right? If you see the hierarchy, it looks like the things have been arranged in a column format, right? So we will be using this column composable. And then again, I want to add some padding, or you could say it as white space. Then since I want to, center the contents both horizontally and vertically, I will be specifying these two parameters, vertical arrangement and horizontal alignment. If you see, both has values arrangement dot center and alignment dot center horizontally. So which makes the content to be at the center of the surface. So this was regarding like how specifying to the Jetpack Compose how to arrange things within the column. So now we need to specify the contents, right? So to do that, I will be opening the curly braces, and I will be declaring a variable called as total per person. So if you see, even though it might look complex, but it's pretty simple. What it does is it basically takes the value. So remember, we have declared this variable total per person. Yeah, it's basically the parameter, right? So we will be receiving some values. So for example, if the value is something like 134.05, 56. So what it does is it formats this whole string and makes sure that we have only two integers after the decimal point. So that is what this declaration represents. So next we have something like text. So it is used to display the text on the screen. Then again we have the text which displays the total amount per person. So far, do you guys have any doubt? I think you guys have no doubts. Okay, then I will continue with the
No
code.
doubts, Manjanath. You can go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Next we have. So this is the code regarding this top header. Okay. Next we have to code this bill form on the screen, right? So I will be calling this whole thing as bill form. So it has various things like the text field and the split option and the tip amount, and this is the slider that is corresponding to the tip percentage, right? So if you see in our yeah, I'm calling this main content, right? Yeah, in main content I have declared these variables. So here I have something like bill form. So it takes if you click on this function, yeah, it takes various parameters like the modifier, in case just in case you want to modify a few of the things, or you want to restyle the components, we can do the same using this modifier variable. Then as I said earlier, it takes another parameter called as range in order to specify the range of values that this split variable can take. And then we have something like split by state, and which is of the type mutable state. So if you remember, we have not just declared the variable, we have declared the variable and asking Jetpack Compose to remember the values of this variable even if you restart the whole app, right? So this is regarding the split by state. So since we are telling Jetpack Compose to remember the whole, the value of the variable, we can't just specify it as like split by state as it. If you specify like this, the value will be lost once you restart the app. So in order to remember the values, we will be specifying something like mutable state, and within that, we will be specifying its type. So in our case, it is integer, right? So next up, we have something called as tip amount state, which is of the type mutable state double. Then we have something called as total per person state, which is of the type mutable state double. And finally, we will be passing a function as a parameter. So even though it doesn't make any sense now, we'll see why are we passing this function in the later part of the session, right? So just remember that we are passing a function as a parameter to this composable, right? So even here also you have declared some variables, like we have some variable called as total bill state, which is of the type string. Then here we have some text field, right? So what happens is the user might not type anything and still might enter this go button, right? So it might break the whole app. So in order to check whether the text field is empty or not, we'll be using this valid state. So what it does is it basically retrieves the value that is present within this text field, and it checks whether the so since okay, after retrieving, we will be trimming. So what is this trimming? So user might enter some white spaces, right? So we need to remove those white spaces before processing the value. So we will be trimming those white spaces, and after trimming, we will make sure that the text field contains some value. So we are checking whether the value of the text field is empty or not, which can be achieved using this built-in function called as is not empty, right? So it basically this whole thing returns a boolean that is either it can be true or false. So next we have something like keyboard controller. So it's like to type something on the screen, we need to have access to the keyboard, right? So in order to give access to the keyboard, we will be using this keyboard controller. And after typing this, if the user clicks on this button, the keyboard must be closed, right? So we will be controlling all these aspects using this keyboard control variable. So for this, I have assigned this variable called as local software keyboard controller dot current. So it will be basically revoking, or it will show the default keyboard that you are using, right? So next we have something like slider position state. So this variable corresponds to the value of this slider. So which is of the type of float. And finally, we have this tip percentage variable. So this tip percentage is not hard coded, right? So this tip percentage value will be derived based on the value that is present in this slider, right? So we will be using the value of the slider. So what happens is this slider basically returns the value. Yeah, slider returns the value ranging from 0 to 1. So it might look something like 0.55. So in order to convert it, we need to multiply it by 100 and finally convert it into integer, which can be done using this toInt function, right? So this was regarding the various parameters and the variables we have declared within this build form. So now we need to add components, right, to this build form. So for that, if you see the arrangement, it basically looks like, the components have been arranged in a column format, right? So I'll specify this column, and after calling this column, I will call this top header. So top header will be displayed on the screen. So before moving on further, so if you try to run this app now, so let's see what output we are getting. Yeah, code is running. Yeah. So if you see, we are getting this top header, right? And it is expected. But after this, we are supposed, like, we should be getting this bill form, right? Enter bill, split options, and this tip percentage and all. But the reason why we are not getting that is it's probably due to the fact that okay, yeah, yeah. If you see, we are getting this top header, but the reason why we are not getting these other UI components is that we have not coded those UI components, and we will be coding this UI components one by one. So first we need to draw things on the screen, right? So for that I will be specifying this surface, and I will add some padding. So why do we need padding? So if you see the UI, yeah, yeah, if you see the UI, okay, just a minute. Yeah, if you see the UI, there it has some white space around the this build form, right? So in order to add those white space, we will be using this padding function, and it will occupy the max width, and which can be specified using this function. In order to add rounded corners, I will be using this rounded corner shape function, and we'll be assigning this radius of the corner within this corner size function, right? So if you observe closely, we have some sort of border around this whole build form, right? So in order to add border, we will be specifying something like border, and I specify the border using this border stroke. So if you're thinking like how do I know all these things? Like if you're just getting started, you might feel intimidated, but if you just hover over this surface composable, you can see that we have various options. I have used this modifier option. I have also used this shape. We have other options like color, content color, and border and elevation, right? So if at all, if you feel stuck at any time, you can always go through the docs, and it will make things clear, right? So here we have a column, right? So to specify things within a column format, I'm using this column function. And again, this is used to modify things. It adds white space around the UI components. And if you see in the previous example, in the previous composable, that is top header, we have arranged the components. at the center of the container, right? But here we need to start from the top, right? So I will be starting the arrangement vertically, starting from the top. To specify that, we have something like vertical arrangement variable. Since I want to start from the top, I will specify it as arrangement.top. And horizontal alignment, here we have specified something like center horizontally, I guess. Yeah, center horizontally. But since here we are starting from the left, or you could say it as start, we will be specifying the same using this horizontal alignment. Since we want to align the things starting from this left, I will be specifying it using this variable or value called as alignment.start, right? So before we move, yeah, next we need to add this input field, right? So far, do you guys have any doubt? Think you guys have no doubt. Okay,
Feel free to ask
but
any doubts, guys. It's fine if it's like a basic question also. Just feel free to ask any doubts.
yeah, cool. So we need to add this input field, right, within this build form. So if you remember, we had this input field specified within the components, right? So now we will be coding this input field. So in order to, so if you look at this function input field, it takes various values. So first up, we have something like modifier. As I said earlier, it will be used to style the default theme or styling provided by Jetpack Compose. So the value that will be present within this input field will be of the type string. So in order to store that value, I'll be using this value state. And this is something like label ID. Like it is used to identify the string uniquely. In our case, it's not useful. But since I want to make this input field, uh, reusable to other apps, I have included this label ID also. So enable, this is used to enable or disable this input field. And we have one more parameter named eSingleLine. So what happens is when you type out this, so if I type out something like this, it will just go to the first, like it will be presented on the same line, right? Even in Compose, we have this option called as eSingleLine, which represents the whole input on the same line. Next type, we have something like keyboard type. So here we are using this keyboard type of the type number since we just want numbers. If you want keyboard type of the normal type, you could use something like keyboard type dot alphabet. So IMA action. So if you see here this blue button, you might have observed that in various apps this blue button changes, right? Depending on the action that is allowed for the user. So in our case, we want to process the tip amount, right? So for that, I will be using this next IMA action. So on action is basically like after pressing this blue button, what do we need to do? Like we should specify like the action that need to be taken or the logic that needs to be executed after pressing this blue button, right? So this was regarding the various parameters. Okay, next we have something. So now we'll start with the code. So in order to add the text field, we should use something like outlined text field and make sure to import it. Yeah, it has been imported. So first we will be specifying some default value, right? So instead of specifying the default value, we'll just specify this value state. So since as I said earlier, this will be the variable that will be keeping track of all the values that is stored within this text field. So if you store just like this, it will, so okay, let's see what happens. Okay. On value change, I'll be passing some function. So we need to update the previous value, right? For that, I'll be value state. I need to update this. So if you remember, we have some default parameter, right? IT. So if you see, we have some error popping out. So the reason why we are having this error is val cannot be reassigned. Yeah. So for that, yeah, it says val cannot be reassigned, right? Mm, so in order to, since this variable is not the very usual type, if you remember, we have declared it using the remember keyword, right? In order to access the values, you need to call the attribute called as value. So next, we need to reassign it, right? Value start value. Yeah. Now, if you see, there is no error, right? So this is how you access the values that you have declared using the remember keyword. So you specify the name of the variable, and in order to access the value, you will be specifying this dot value, right? Okay, think I can maximize this screen. Yeah. Okay, next up we has now we have so what happens is on value change as the user types some text on the text field, the previous value will be overwritten by the new value. So that is what this little code is doing, right? Okay, next, so to make things look easier to code and debug, I will enter all of them in the next line. So next up, we have something like label. So what is this label? So basically, you need to specify some label, right, to this text box. So we will be specifying this label using this label keyword. Since it is a text, I will be specifying it using a text composable. So I'll specify something like label ID. Yeah, we have some error. Okay, we need to add commas, right? Yeah. So what is this label ID? So this label ID will be this whole text enter bill, right? So next up we have something like leading icons. What it does is we have some icon right here, the dollar symbol. So which can be specified using this leading icon function, or you could say it as a parameter. So in leading icon, we need to specify using this icon. Within icon takes two parameters, image vector and content description. So within the image description, I will specify something like icons dot default. Icon dot, instead of using the default icons, I will be using this rounded icons. So here we have something like attach money. Yeah. So this will be representing this dollar symbol that is present within the text field. So content description, just set as icon. Okay, next up we have something like a single line, right? So if you see, it has some various parameters. It has some parameter called a single line, which makes the whole user input stay on the same line. So for this single line parameter, I'll be using this e single line parameter that we are accepting as a parameter. So this is the e single line. Okay, we need to specify commas, right? Yeah. Okay, next we need to specify the text style. This is used to style the text that is present within the text text box or text field. So in order to specify the text style, I will be using this text style. And within this, I'll specify the font size. We have various parameters. So first I'll specify the font size. So I'll specify something like 18 dot, instead of, you cannot use DPL. To specify the font size, you should use something like SP, right? Next up, we have something like, you need to specify the color also, right? So for that, I will be using the color parameter. Again, if you are thinking like, how am I knowing all these things? So if you hover over this, you can see that it has various parameters and you can customize it using these parameters, right? So I will specify the color as, I will be using the colors provided by the material theme. Material theme dot colors. Then I will use something like on background. So what is the benefit of using this material theme colors instead of using this normal colors? Like earlier we have used something like color dot red, right? So what is the benefit? So what happens is, most of the phones these days we have dark mode, right? So what happens is, if you specify the colors like using the usual way, you need to handle color of text for both the light mode and dark mode. So if you specify the colors using this material theme, it will automatically handle both dark mode and the light mode, right? So that's the benefit of using this material theme colors. So after specifying the textile, I'll add comma, and then has something like, okay, I have to use this modifier, right? Yeah. I'll modify some of the styling. So for that, I'll just access the modifier. So this modifier corresponds to this modifier that we are, passing it through the function, right? So modifier, I'll add some padding. So padding for bottom, I'll add something like 10 dp. Then we have some. Then at the start of the text, yeah, it has some white space, right? So to add that, we need to specify the padding using this start parameter. Even for that, I will be specifying the 10 dp. Then we need to add padding to the end as well. For that, yeah, I think we should keep it as 10 on. Yeah. Next, we have used all this. Next, we have something like we need to use all these variables, right? So before we move on further, we need to specify the keyboard actions. Yeah, if you see, we must have, yeah. Next, we will be using this keyboard options. I think we should specify keyboard options. For these keyboard options, I'll be specifying the keyboard options function, and within that function, I'll specify the keyboard type. So as we want the keyboard type as keyboard type number, I'll just pass this parameter keyboard type, right? Yeah. Next, we need to specify something like IMEI action. So as I said earlier, we have that blue button, right? So in order to specify that blue button, we'll be just passing this variable IMEI action. Okay, next we have something like keyboard action. After pressing this blue button, we need to, do some actions, right? So for that, I'll be using this keyboard action. So in the keyboard action, I will be passing this on action. Yeah, I forgot to add commas, right? Yeah, on action. So apart from this enabled, we have used all the parameters, right? Yeah. So now if you, so here we need, so now we need to display this whole thing on the mobile screen, right? Yeah. In order to do that, we need to call it within the build form composable. So we need to code out this keyboard actions part. So to code that. So we have something like, so for these keyboard actions, we have something, yeah. So first we need to check whether the input is empty or not, right? So for that, we will be specifying the valid state. We will be using this valid state variable, and so if it is valid, or in other words, if the text field is not empty, we will be doing something, right? So what if the text field is empty? So if the text field is empty, we'll be just returning the default actions that is provided by Jetpack Compose. Right. Okay. So what if the text field is not empty? So if the text field is not empty, we need to, the user will be able to change, type the values on the input field, right? So we need to pass this function. So if you remember now, yeah, remember we had this function. We are passing the function as a parameter, right? So we will be using this function after gathering the input from the user. So after the value of the input changes, we will be using the variable total build state. We will be accessing the value, and I will remove all the white spaces that is around this string. So after taking the input, we need to close the keyboard, right? So for that, I will be using this keyboard controller. So if the keyboard controller, if the keyboard is present on the screen, that is, we are asking if the keyboard is present on the screen, if, then hide it. Else, do not do nothing, right? So that is achieved using this null operator called as question, right? So this is how you specify the input field. So now we have something like, now if you run this whole code, you should be able to see the input field on the screen. Let's see. So till now, I think you guys have no doubts, I guess, right? Okay, to summarize, we are using this input field and we will be passing the value that is, yeah, as you can see, let me make this a bit larger. Yeah, if you can see the input field is appearing on the screen, and as is specified in the components, only the number keyboard is appearing, right? So this is regarding the input field. So we are passing this value that is default value, and this is the, as if you do this, since the whole input field is empty, nothing is happening, right? So we will see this in action in the later part. So we will be passing this label ID and we will be enabling this input field. And this is the single line and this is the keyboard actions based on the values. That is whether the input field is empty or not. Based on that, keyboard actions will be triggered, right? So what if this is for the all the things on this code represents the keyboard is empty, we'll be returning the default actions that is provided by Jetpack Compose. So what if it has some value? Let's say I enter some value, something like 123, right? What if it has some value like 123? So for that, it means that valid state will be having the value as true. So it enters this if condition. Yeah, before we move. So if you see it's not working, we will go through this. So for now, we'll close this in later. Yeah. So if it is valid, I will just tell it. Yeah. So what happens is, I'll just cancel out the whole thing. So if it is valid, show this entire thing. So if it is not valid, just show the empty box. So empty box is nothing but some white space. Yeah. If it is not valid, or if that is, in other words, if the input field does not contain anything, just show this empty field. So if it is valid, say I enter some value. If you see, as soon as I enter the value, all this various option shows up on the screen, right? So that is what we are handling this if else condition, right? So if it is valid, draw a row. Yeah. Yeah. If it is valid, if you see the first, we are specifying this whole thing, the column, right? So after specifying this text field, we need to specify the split buttons. So for that, we need to, if you see the arrangement, the all the components that is using, even this text, the buttons, and the value, the split, are being arranged in a row fashion, right? So we will be or in a horizontal terms, right? So we will be specifying this whole thing using this row composable. So within that, I'll be specifying the text widget, which says split. Yeah, if you see the emulator, yeah, it says split. Next up, we have something like, so I need to arrange this text. I need to arrange this or align this text, right? So for that, I will be specifying the horizontal alignment property, and I will specify something like center vertically, and I will be adding some space between this text and the buttons, right? To specify the space, I will be using this spacer composable, which takes a modifier as a parameter. This so we will be modify. We are adding, horizon space horizontally, right? So to specify the space horizontally, we will be using this width parameter, right? after specifying this for split, we should try to achieve this layout, right? Minus button, the value of the split, and the finally the plus button. So for that, first we need to go through the code of this round button. So if I click, if I go through this function, yeah, it's a simple function. So it takes a parameter of the type modifier, which is used to modify the stylings. And then it takes something called as image vector. So using this image vector, we will be specifying these icons, right? So we need to account for the clicks, right? So if the user clicks on this plus or minus button, we need to increase or decrease the values accordingly. So in order to do that, we will be passing a function as a parameter. So this tint is used to specify the color of this icon. And since it is black, I will be using this black. But since I wanted to make it a little transparent, I will add this alpha value, right? It is used to make things transparent. So background color is specified using this parameter, and this elevation is used to specify the shadows, right? So in order to achieve this, I will be using a composable called as card, and I'll be adding some white space. So in order to make this card clickable, I should be adding this clickable function within the modifier. So as soon as the user clicks, you should invoke this onClick function, right? So after onClick, so if you see, now we are not able to see anything because we haven't coded anything, right, for this. So after yeah, so since I wanted to make this whole button in this circular shape, I'll specify the shape, and these two things specify the background and elevation, right? So I'll be specifying the icon within this card composable, which is accessed using this image vector, right? So this was regarding the round button. I think it is clear. Do you guys have any doubts? Okay, if there's no doubts, okay, I'll move on to the next part. Okay, coming back to this main activity, yeah, we have specified this split by, yeah, this will be the minus button, right? So now we need to say what should happen when we press on this minus button. So to specify that, we need to type out the code right within this onClick function. So for the minus button, as soon as the user clicks the button, we should modify this value, right? So how should we modify? So for that, I will just use this assignment operator. So if the value of the split by state is greater than 1, then I will decrease the value of this split by state, right? Suppose if it was 0, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like you can't have negative values, right, for this split by state variable. So I'll be decreasing this value. Else, I will just keep it as 1. Yeah, 1. So as simple as that. Okay. Next, we will be using something similar to this here also. We have something. We have to add some more code to it, but we'll look into it later. Yeah. So for this plus button, we will be specify. We need to increment the values, right? So we'll access the split by state variable in order to increase the value. So before that, first we need to check whether the value is within the range. Split by state value within the range. Yeah, it's good. Hmm. If it is within the range, we will increment the value, right? Else we'll just keep it as it is. Here also we need to add some function. Yeah. So now if you rerun this whole app, you should be able to see the whole thing. Okay, I think we have some error here. Okay. Okay, if you see this, yeah. We are not just passing an integer, we are passing something like int range, right? So in order to access the first value of this int range or the last value, in our case, we need to access the last value, right? So in order to do that, we need to specify something like, yeah, where is that? Yeah, range dot, give me the last value, I specify something like last. Yeah, this must make things work. Let's see what happens. Yeah, now I'll try something. Yeah, as you can see, the split counter is working. Okay, next up we have something like this tip row, right? So within this tip row, since this whole thing is arranged horizontally, I will be using this row composable, and I will use add some padding both horizontally and vertically, and I will be specifying it via the horizontal and vertical parameters. Next, I will be specifying this text using this text composable. Since I wanted to align it center with respect to the vertical axis, I'll be using this alignment dot center vertically. Then I need to add some space, right? So for that, I will be using this spacer composable. And finally, we need to display the tip amount. So for that, I'll be using text composable for one more time. And instead of hard coding values, I will be using the tip amount state dot value. So if you remember, we have declared this or receiving these variables via the bill form, right, as a parameter. So this was regarding the tip row. Next up, we have the slider, right? Yeah. So if you see, this whole thing is arranged in a column. So I'll be using the column composable. So first I'll be specifying this tip percentage within the text composable. Then I'll add some space between the text and the slider. And within the, so in order to specify or draw the slider in composable, we'll just specify something like slider. So if you click on the tab, you should be able to see this, and it has two required parameters, the value and on value change. So for the value, I'll be assigning the slider position state on value. So if you go through this, yeah, by default it is zero. Even it is, so it is showing zero, right? Okay. So what should, like if we try to drag this, the value should change, right? But in order to do that, we need to code this function on value change. So in order to code that, so what are we trying to achieve? As soon as the user slides this slider, the value should be updated on the screen, right? So to code that, yeah. So as soon as the value changes, I will just access the slider position dot value, and I assign it with new value. Okay, by default we have this IT parameter, right? So this new value will be available in this as soon as the user drags this slider. The new value will be available within this IT parameter. So instead of this, I will use something like new val. So now this new value will be available within this new value variable. So I will update the old value with the new value. After that, I need to update the tip amount also, right? So before that, let's see things work. Type some number. Yeah, it is working. Cool. So this is how you make the slider slidable or interactive, in other words. So we need to update other things as well. So we'll go through this after, we'll come back to this later. Okay, I think, yeah, this is steps. What happens is, if you want to add some breakpoints within the slider, you should use these steps. So if you run the code again, yeah, it has added some breakpoints. Yes, yeah. If you see it, there are some tiny dots, right? So it is used to add breakpoints. For now, I'll just comment it out. So this is how we achieve the add interactivity to the app. Even though we have added the interactivity, but the app is not yet functional, right? So in order to make it functional, we need to code some this both of the function, right? So in order to code, we have two functions, namely calculate total tip, and we have the total amount. Like we have another function called as calculate total person. So we'll just remove this. So in order to calculate a total tip, I'll use the return. Since this function returns a double, I'll be using this return statement. So I'll go something like total bill is greater than 1, and total bill is a string. Like it's a string, right? So we will be receiving this values in the format of string. So we need to check whether it's a string. So if it is a string and it is not empty, right? If all of these cases hold true, then we can say that total bill is equal to, yeah, to specify that, I'll be using these curly braces. Total bill is equal, well, it must be total bill is equal to, okay, we are just calculating a tip, right? So in order to calculate a tip, we'll use this total bill variable, and we need to get the tip percentage variable, and finally divide it by 100. I think we don't need this. Instead, specify the whole expression within the small braces. Else, just return 0.0. This is the function to calculate a total tip. So what we are checking is, we are checking whether the amount is greater than 1, and we are also making sure that it is received in the format of string and the string is not empty. If this holds true, then we will be calculating the tip, that is the total tip. Else we'll be just returning this zero value, right? Okay, next we have something like calculate total person. It has parameters like total bill, split by, and tip percentage, and it should return the value of the type double. So we'll code one variable called as bill. So first I need to add the, so for total person, it's basically like you'll be having some total tip. Based on the value of the split, you'll be dividing the whole, the tip by split, and then you will be adding it to the total bill, right? So to do that, first I will calculate the total tip. So I'll call this above function calculate total tip. I'll be passing the variables total bill, take the value of the type total bill, and then tip percentage, which will have value of the type tip percentage, and finally, yeah, this whole thing returns the tip, right? And then we need to add this total tip to the total bill. So this is how you add. This will be the total bill for the entire group. So in order to get the total per person, we need to return bill divided by split by. So I'll be specifying this whole expression within the small brackets. So this completes our utility functions. Now let's try to put all these pieces together and make this whole app functional, right? Okay, we will start from the scratch. Yeah, we have to code some function here. So what is happening here? So basically, when the user, clicks on the remove button, they should, changes the value of the split by variable, right? And after changing the value of the split by, we need to change the total tip per person also, right? So in order to do that, we need to code some logic within this onClick function. So for that, I'll be using this. Yeah. first I will calculate the total per person state. I need to change the the value of the total per person as the split by changes, right? So I will use this variable and assign it with some value based on the uh, return value from the function. So I will be accessing the value using this value variable. So for that, I'll be calling this function calculate total per person. So it takes various parameters like total bill. We will pass it something like total bill state dot value. Since it is of the type string, we will convert it into double, and then we have the split by parameter, which expects the parameter of the type integer. Just pass this split by state variable and its value, right? Next up, we have something like tip percentage. For this, I'll just pass the tip percentage. Yeah, this completes the logic for this minus icon. So what we did is, as the as you press this minus button, the value decreases, right? So corresponding to this value, we will be updating the value of the total per person. So we need to do the same for the plus button, right? So for that, I will be logic remains the same. Okay, what happened? So for that, again, I will be using this total per person state, and for that, I will call this. Okay, since I want to modify its value, I will be using the value attribute, and I will call the function calculate total person. I need to pass some variables, right? Total bill is of the type total bill state dot value, and since it's a string, I want to change it into the double. I'll use this to double function. Okay, next we have the split by variable. For this, I will just pass the split by state dot value. Then finally, we have the tip percentage, and I will be passing the tip percentage variable, right? So I think so if you run the app, things should work. Mm. Okay, I'll enter some amount, say 100. Yeah, it's working. So tip percentage, it will not work. Yeah, it's working. Yeah, yeah. So let's say I have something like 50 per, say 10%. So 10 percentage of 100 is 10. 100 plus 10 is 110. Since we have specified the value as 2, 110 divided by 2 is 55, right? So it's working perfectly. So if you observe, it's changing. So as I said earlier, as you click this minus or plus button, even the value here in this purple tail or the top header changes accordingly. But if you slide this slider, it's not at all changing, right? Like it should happen dynamically, right? So if I change this, now it will change, but it is not happening dynamically, right? So for that, we need to add some logic within this sliders on value change function. So what should we do? Like we need to update the this value dynamically as the value of the slider changes. So for that, again, the logic remains pretty much the same. So I need to modify this variable, right? Total per person. So I will use the total. Okay, well, since first I need to uh, update a tip. Like what happens is what I'm trying to achieve is if I slide this whole thing, even the values should update here, but it's not happening now. The reason is we have not specified the logic. So first, in order to do that, first we need to update the tip amount as we drag the slider. So for that, I will be using this tip amount state, and I will access its value. So first, I need to update the tip, right? So as soon as I drag the slider, the new tip should be stored or updated. So for that, I will just call this calculate total tip, and it expects parameters like total bill. I'll just specify the total bill state dot value. Then okay, since it is of the type string, see if you see, yeah, it is asking for the parameter of the type double, but we have found string, so we should convert it into double, right? Okay, next we have something like split by. Okay, okay, this is total. What are the parameters? Yeah, it's tip percentage, not split by. Tip percentage just pass the tip percentage variable. So now if you run this, the tip amount should update. Let's see what happens. Yeah, I specified it. Yeah, the app has restarted. Say I will enter it as 100. Now if you see, yeah, it is working as the, so 10% of 100 is 10 only, right? 9% is 9. So as the slide is updating, even the tip amount is being updated. And the last thing we need to achieve is, as the tip amount updates, we need to update this value as well, right? So for that, we need to add some more logic. So we need to update this total per person, right? So in order to access that, we will be using this total per person state variable, and I will access its value. And again, I'll call this function called as calculate total person. It expects parameters of the type total bill. So I'll be passing the total bill state, its value. Since it is of the type string, I will convert it into double. Then again, it takes parameter of the type split by. I'll be passing the split by state variable, not a variable, but its value, right? So yeah. Then finally, we have the tip percentage parameter, and I'll be passing the tip percentage variable. So this should make things work. Let's see. The app has restarted. Yeah. Cool. So let's say I enter the tip amount as 100. Let's say I want to split between two persons. So 100 by 2 is 50. Since I have specified the tip percentage as 0, it is 50 only, right? So what if I specify it as 10? Yeah. So if you observe closely, everything is updating, right? Like dynamically, right? So the whole app is working. So this was pretty much it for today's session. Yeah, if you guys have any doubts, you can put them in the chat box.
So, guys, if you have any doubts, please feel free to ask in the chat box or unmute yourself and ask. It's fine if even it's a basic question or a new one when we were there at one stage.
I think we don't have any doubts.
Okay, then I think we can end the session here. First of all, I would like to thanks everyone who have joined today and making this a successful session, a hands-on session specifically. So hope you guys enjoyed it and found it knowledgeable and helpful as much as I did. And also will be the feedback form will be rolling out to the respective mails. So make sure to fill that and provide suggestion, improvements, and your experience with the session and the Compose scam. And yep, thank you. Have a nice day.